Good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me over here on such a beautiful day as well. It's always great to be over in Perth because there's always really interesting things happening here. Everyone says, oh, tell us what's happening over on the East Coast. But actually I find some really inspiring things that are happening here and a really strong community. So thank you for having me. As Corinne said, my name's Amanda Cahill. I run an organisation called The Next Economy. And some people might know me from the Centre for Social Change. I actually ran the Centre for Social Change for 6 years, and we've just basically rebadged. So we're still doing the same work, but with a much more direct focus on the economy itself. And I have the privilege of working with people across Australia in regional areas, and basically working with them where they're dealing with economic change. Generally from a negative perspective around dealing with challenges, and they want to start thinking about what they can do about those. But also as communities that are saying, look, we see what's coming on those slides, and we actually want to do something about it. We actually want to build resilience in for the future. Where do we start with that? And so a lot of the work we do is actually looking at the economic opportunities in dealing with the challenges that you just heard about. But looking at how do we move towards a low or zero emissions economy? How do we actually regenerate the natural environment, but in ways that are actually going to look after people too? How do we build in new ways of producing and exchanging that actually leave everyone better off, not just a few people? So these are the kinds of questions that we work with people at a ground level with. And so Corinne asked me to talk about hope, like start to talk about how do we do that and how does it, be inspiring, like give people some hope. And to be completely honest, so normally that's where I play. I don't have a lot of trouble maintaining hope despite all the things that are going on, because I am working at the ground level and I get to meet such amazing people who are connected in not just at the local level but internationally and are doing remarkable things. They might not see it themselves, but they are. So I see the changes already here. We are in the middle of the transition. What's going to come out of that, nobody knows, but we have all the pieces in place. But to be honest, when I started trying to think about what I was going to say this week, I really struggled. I was like, I don't feel so hopeful this week. I'm just feeling a bit angry, really, and left out of the system. Like it's been frustrating the last couple of years of working with people on the ground, seeing so much potential, and then seeing how some things get squashed or left out or not invested in. And Corinne, for people who were here last night, when he said, the stomping on the flowers, I'm seeing that more and more. So as the crisis hits more and people are feeling it more, the more likely there's going to be pushback against anything that is changing. And there is changes, and that's threatening the status quo. So that's what I want to talk about. I want to talk about the connection between the economy and politics, but at that micro level. But I want to focus in on the spaces where I'm seeing that connection come together to create new spaces for people in Australia to experiment with different forms of democracy. Because there's a new politics that's emerging here, not just a new economy. We have to learn to be different together. So that's what I'd like to look at. Sorry, this is a little bit all over the place. So in terms of the spaces that are actually opening up, that I see are incredibly disrupted, it's all the things that you're going to be talking about this afternoon. So it's thinking about things like maker labs, or food buying co-ops, or digital sharing platforms, or community-owned renewable energy, or participatory budgeting techniques, or circular economy principles. These things are enabling us to produce things differently, to organise labour differently, to pay for or remunerate for that labour differently, but exchange and then capture surplus in different kinds of ways as well. So that's kind of classic economic, that's what economics deals with. But they're also about relationships of power in how do we organise around that. Who gets to decide in the co-op just simple things like the day of distribution and who's doing most of the work and making the orders and who's that volunteer that comes back every week where some people don't really stand up to their obligations. So how we decide and work together around that is a question of power. And through that, people are starting to ask some really interesting questions. So it's not just the economic experimentation itself, it's not just the technology, but it is these questions around who gets access to what resources? Who gets to decide? Is it an ownership model or is it a shared model? What do we do with surplus? Who benefits from that? And are we a flat structure, or are we actually enabling some people to amass more than others? And these are really important questions because often in this space, we've enamoured with the idea of flat structures and that there is no power, like we're moving away from this hierarchical system with power in it. But power is just about negotiation. It's about the relationship between, and it's always changing and shifting. So I actually want to challenge people to not reject the idea of power, and all the stuff that Martin was just talking about is about power and how that's creating more inequality. But how do we get smart about dealing with the politics as it comes up so we don't actually throw out the power that we have to make a different system? Because as these things become more successful and are more threatening to the status quo, the more there is going to be powerful forces that are actually going to push this out or squash it. So how do we build power around that? So the really interesting thing to me is, I might be saying that and you think, well, yes, in this kind of forum, we know about that, but that's not a mainstream thing. But again, one of the reasons I have hope is on the ground everywhere that I'm going, people are actually asking these radical questions about the economy and about power. So it really struck me a few years ago, and this is the reason I started doing the work in Australia. I'd been working internationally for 20 years. And the reason I came back to work in Australia was because, I'm sorry if you've heard this story already, but I was invited up to North Queensland because a guy called Tim Buckley, who looks at the financial markets around international thermal coal, in 2014 was invited up to talk about the fact that our biggest trading partners are moving away from thermal coal and we need to plan for what happens after that. And he just showed graph after graph and statement from India and China how much they were investing in renewable energy, that they actually want to use their own coal instead of imported coal. And he said, look, this is just the reality. I'm not pushing something here, I'm just showing you what's going on. And what happened was people were like, oh my God, he's right. The coal price has been down for 2 years. What are we going to do? Even if coal comes back, we're actually not prepared to deal with the peaks and troughs, and it's all the problems that Martin was just talking about. We need to diversify. So somebody rang me and said, hey, I think we're doing something really bad here because we don't know how to answer that. Can you come and talk to people about what they can do around community-led economic development? And I said, well, I don't really know much about that. I do international work, but I've got some steps, so let's just talk about that. And they said, don't worry, they're going to hate you. They're going to think you're a greenie, so it doesn't really matter what you say. And I was like, awesome. And I come from North Queensland, so I knew what I was in for. But actually the opposite happened, and a lot of people turned up to the presentations and we got a lot of media. So people said, can you come back and talk to us? And it was like head of the Chamber of Commerce and people elected to council and business leaders saying, I'm not a greenie, but I care about my community and the economy. We need to do something about this. So I went back, organised 12 meetings. By the time at the end of the week, I'd spoken to 54 people. And it was the same. It was people asking these radical questions about power. They were saying, what has happened to our communities? We used to be more resilient. We used to have all the services we needed in our regional cities, and they're not there anymore. We've got empty shops. What happened? We've lost control of this system. And these were incredibly conservative people saying this. Like the sort of questions we ask on the kind of left side of politics, they were asking. And I couldn't get over the sense of fear and disempowerment. I was like, because things were bad, but they weren't that bad yet. And compared to everywhere else I've worked in the world, we have it pretty good. We've got a lot of resources and we've got the technical know-how to deal with this. We know what we need to do if we want to move to zero emissions. And there's jobs in that. And there's economic opportunities, so I couldn't get over the fear. And I was like, this is the kind of stuff that led to Nazi Germany. So when Martin was talking about those trends before and up to the Second World War, that's what led to the Second World War, was that sense of fear and impoverishment and a real lived sense of that. I was like, wow, if we don't get in and answer this and show what the possibilities are, that's what we're leading to. And 10 days later, I turned on the news, and it was the first big Reclaim Australia rallies that right-wing fascist group, anti-immigration group. It's the first time they'd had their rallies nationally around the country on the same day, and one of the biggest was in Mackay, where I'd just been, and it was led by the local MP. He was the keynote speaker. And I stood in front of that television covered in goosebumps and went, this is what I'm doing for the next 10 years. This is not happening in my country. Not when we have so many opportunities that the rest of the world doesn't have. We can get this right. I thought maybe it'd be a couple of years because I knew that there were government programs in place to fund things. And there are companies already starting to build large-scale renewable energy projects. But, you know, started talking to ministers about it, and they're like, oh yeah, you're right, we should start talking about transition, but we're not going to yet. People aren't ready for that yet. So there's this real inertia, and I actually said to them, if you don't respond, one nation will, because there's this sense of being abandoned on the ground, and we need to respond to that. And they're like, oh, nah. This is 2014. What have we seen since then? One nation has come back. We've had Trump elected, and I was in the southern states of America just before he got elected, and I went, yep, we're in trouble. So this is our job. We need to build all the things that people are involved in this room are doing to show what's possible, that we can create that well-being directly. But we also need to build power around it. We need to connect together and work out how do we build a network that's powerful, that we can support each other and grow this and make it visible so people realise they have another way. And I've gone totally off script. So there is an awakening that's happening. And while that's really scary, and there are days where I just, like this week, where I'm just like, there's the disruption and that sense of, oh my God, this can't be real, is also an opening to start having a different conversation with people. And that's what I do for a living, is have a different conversation. So I just want to share with you some of the things I've learned over the last 4 years that tend to work to open up spaces for dialogue rather than shut them down, which is often what we're seeing in national politics. One is meet people where they're at, not just physically, but where are they at in their thinking, and being open and curious and listening, starting with listening and respect, no matter what the view is. Acknowledging fear or the emotions that come up, that is real for people. Doesn't mean you have to agree with it, but actually going, yeah, things are tough, and you know, that must be tough for you, actually gets through a lot of those defences when people are being told that they're wrong all the time. Focusing on what people care about, the fundamentals, because under the surface of all this political difference, people do care about the same things. They care about their community, they care about the future, they care about their kids. So there's a starting point for all of us to go, well, what sort of future do we want to have? What does this look like if everybody has a chance to live a good life? Being armed with positive stories around where real change is happening and local people are doing it for themselves. So all the things that you're going to hear about this afternoon, because people don't know what's going on and that they have an option. But it's also not just focusing on the local level. In Australia, compared to the rest of the world, we still kind of have systems in place that work. It doesn't always work very well, like we've seen this week, but we do have a public service. We do have responsibility. There are mechanisms for accountability and to influence decision making. But in a way, we're kind of behind a lot of the world because we haven't had to fight for that. So we don't have a lot of the political skills in place to know how do you affect that process. It just feels outside of us. So things like, how do you engage in submission processes or visiting your local MP? These things still work, but if we just give up on the whole system, we give up on the power that we've got. In talking to people, going back to basics, so for us to have really simple ways of talking about the economy and not getting caught up in jargon, and using facts. Facts really matter. And it seems really obvious, but it's things like, I was doing work up in Townsville a few months ago where there's Heart of Adani country support, and the local council's put a lot of money in. You guys know about Adani, right, on the west coast, yeah. And the local council's put a lot of money into keeping that project going. And they're like, we have to for the jobs. Now, as part of what we did, we mapped out all of the renewable energy projects that were happening in the area. There were 26 potential large-scale renewable energy projects, billions of dollars, thousands of jobs. And the 11 that they're going ahead, they actually don't have enough construction workers locally to work on those projects. So we're going to have to get people from outside to work on them. But in the next breath, they're saying, but we still need Adani for the jobs. So using those facts and breaking it down is really powerful. And the last thing is holding others to account. So it is actually engaging with the political system. It is about corporations do have responsibility in law. So how do we actually go, well, yeah, it is your job to pay tax and your job to do rehabilitation properly. Because at the moment, we're not actually holding that to account or making it visible. So this is the work that I see. We need to keep doing what we're doing, get better at understanding what the potential of the new economy is. But we can't shy away from the politics, but we also can't shy away from our own power. We have a lot of power to actually make this happen and to build an ecosystem and a network that can actually nurture and support and midwife this through to the next phase. And that's the challenge I want to leave you with today. As you're listening to people present on specific examples, think about how does this build our power? How do I talk about this in a way that engages and enables people to be involved in it, that brings everyone along with us? I'll leave it there. Thank you. And just two things. So the Next Economy website's still new. So if you want to check it out, it's nexteconomy.com.au. You do have to put in the address yet because Google won't find it for you. And there's a subscribe button. The other thing I want to just highlight for everyone is there's a group that have pulled together something called Australia Remade, which is a vision for Australia and where we can go. And there's a section on the economy in there. I'd really encourage you to check out the vision and use it in your work. Start the conversations using that document. So it's australiaremade.org.